Today I'm going to show you how easy it is to make your very own Italian bakery style focaccia at home. The amount of labor involved amounts to about 10 minutes, 5 when you get really good at it, which I know you will. In fact, this is so easy, you're probably going to make it a few times a week. Could you imagine having this beautiful fluffy focaccia at your table with just minutes of effort? It sounds too good to be true, but it's not. Once you start eating this, you won't be able to stop, at least not your first one, and we're going to make it right now. But before we begin, if you like my videos and you haven't subscribed to I Cook and Paint, then please consider doing so and don't forget to hit the bell. To begin, we're going to weigh out 425 grams of all-purpose flour. If you don't have a scale, that amounts to about 3 3/4 cups. Now I'm going to mix in 360 milliliters of water, or about 1.5 cups, and I'm going to stir this together until I get a very shaggy dough. You don't want any traces of dry flour left. We're going to let this mixture sit for 20 minutes, and this is optional. If you're in a hurry, you don't need to do this, but this is called an auto-lease, and when you let it rest, it gives the flour a chance to absorb the water. This tends to improve the texture of the dough, so if you have time, I highly recommend doing it. You're even going to notice how different it looks after a 20-minute rest. It'll appear to be slightly more wet and more slack. This looks perfect, so now we're going to sprinkle in 3 grams or 1 teaspoon of instant yeast, and if you have active dry, you can also use that. You don't even have to proof it in water, and we're going to mix that in just a few times. I'm sure it's okay to add all the ingredients at once at this stage, but I seem to like to add them in one at a time. So next comes my kosher salt, 1 1/4 teaspoons. So I'm going to mix that in a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to add in some olive oil, 3 tablespoons. And use the best quality olive oil you can afford, because focaccia is one of those things that you don't want to skimp on the olive oil. Once that oil is almost fully incorporated, you want to take your hand and reach deep in the bottom of the dough and grab a piece of it. Now you want to lift this up as high as it'll go without tearing, and then drop it onto itself. Give the bowl a quarter turn and do the same thing again. Reach for a piece of dough right from the bottom, lift it up as high as it'll go without ripping, and drop it onto itself. You want to do this all the way around the dough about 8 to 12 times. And while some people might actually think this is a lot of work, this literally takes only seconds to do. And if 8 to 12 stretch and folds are too much work for you, you can get away with just 4. However many you do, as soon as you're happy with the amount of stretch and folds you've done, flip your dough upside down, cover it, and let it rest for 20 minutes. Now we have to repeat this process 2 more times. So 20 minutes later, come back and do another set of these stretch and folds. You're already going to notice quite a difference in the texture of the dough. It's going to be smoother, a lot more stretchy, and feel quite supple. As you get more experienced with bread making, you're going to learn to really appreciate this texture. It's a sign that things are working, so if your dough looks like this, hats off to you. Now, because a lot of the olive oil has seeped into the dough at this point, it's very likely that your hands are going to stick. So to remedy that, the best thing to do is to just dip your fingers in some cold water. You could use more olive oil, but don't use more flour to prevent sticking. This is an 85% hydration dough, which is very wet for focaccia, but that's what's going to give us the big bubbles. So after this session of stretch and folds, give it another flip, and then cover and let it rest for another 20 minutes. Now you might be wondering, why can't we just knead the dough for 8 to 10 minutes like normal until it's smooth and elastic? Because this is such a high hydration dough, that would almost be impossible. So this is how professional bakers deal with very wet, sticky doughs. The best thing about it is that time does most of the work, and your actual time involved is quite minimal. And those are my favorite things to make because let's face it, today's just one of those days I don't want to work hard. What about you? After this last set of stretch and folds, you can spread this out onto an oiled baking sheet, let it proof for an hour, and bake it right away. But it won't be nearly as superior as if we let this proof in the fridge overnight. So that's what we're going to do. Cover it up, pop it in the fridge, and this is what it's going to look like the next day. Not only is it going to be full of these beautiful big bubbles, but the flavor of the dough is going to be so much more developed. If your dough doesn't have these huge bubbles, don't panic. Every batch can look different. So now I'm going to generously grease a baking sheet with some olive oil, and I'm going to spread this dough out. If you've ever made a homemade pizza before, then this part's going to be a snap. It wouldn't hurt to pull the dough from the fridge a few minutes before doing this. It might make it a little easier to spread out. And don't try to be too perfect about this. Focaccia is supposed to be rustic, so just have fun. You can also divide this into 3 or 4 pieces and make mini focaccias with different toppings. Remember, this is your masterpiece, so you do whatever you want. Now we're gonna let this proof for 45 minutes to an hour, and in the meantime, we're gonna get our herbs ready. My artist friend Laura gave me this fresh rosemary and oregano from her garden, and I tell you, not only is she a killer artist, but she can grow some killer herbs too. These are so pungent. Rip off the leaves by pulling downward in the opposite of their direction of growth, and then just give them a very coarse chop. I don't like to chop them too fine because I want people to see that they're fresh herbs. After about an hour of proofing, this is what the dough looks like. It doesn't look too much different, but if you look closely, you can see that a lot of bubbles have formed. You'll want to preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit at this point, or even earlier if you can. And now we're going to drizzle it generously with some olive oil. Then we're going to top it with our beautiful fresh herbs. I don't like to go overboard here because these are pretty strong. And finally, we're going to hit it with some nice kosher salt. How much you want is entirely up to you. Now dip your fingers in some water and poke little dimples all over the dough. A lot of people like to do this before adding the toppings, but doing it after will help them stick better. Now we're going to bake it for 20 to 25 minutes. It really depends on your oven. But you're looking for a beautiful golden brown color. Pretty much what you would expect. And as cliche as this sounds, your kitchen's going to smell just like an Italian bakery. I think we should take a closer look at this so you can see how it looks when it's properly cooked. Check the bottom and make sure it's this beautiful golden brown. And yes, this focaccia just came out of the oven, so holy moly, that is hot. But as much as you're going to want to cut into this now while it's hot, it really does taste better when you let it cool for at least 45 minutes. And even though the labor was minimal, we still did invest quite a bit of time in this bread, so you want to enjoy it the right way. But look at how bubbly that is. That's what the 85% hydration dough gives us. Now, not everybody likes their focaccia this bubbly, so you would go for a 75 to 80% hydration recipe. You can also cut down the amount of yeast by as little as 1/4 teaspoon. You really just have to experiment and see what kind of focaccia you like best, but this is the way I like it. This is perfect with any Italian meal, or it makes really amazing sandwiches. But when you make this for the first time, I'm pretty sure it's not gonna last that long.